Let's talk now to a regular guest on the show, Claire Pearsall. She's a former Conservative government advisor and joins us right now. Good afternoon to you, Claire.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. Look, we've had those pledges from Rishi Sunak, and he said that's what he wanted to be judged on at the end of the year. They're a year plus old now. Keir Starmer came out with another 5 of his own. These are now the 5 he had, and he's added in this one on the Border Security Command. As a former advisor, and you still work for a Tory MP, do any of these things make any difference to voters? I mean, I know people like me bang on about them and people like you will look at them, but will most voters even notice this? Will they care? Will it win over votes?
Not necessarily. I think it's useful to boil down what you expect to do as a political party and as a political leader. But for the majority of people, they're going to scan down it and just go, oh, well, that's all very nice. How are you going to do it? Now, there's nothing on there with any kind of detail. The Border Security Command, which is already in place, looking at cutting the NHS waiting list. Well, I think pretty much every member of Parliament would have that somewhere on their literature. Everybody wants to do that. And when you sort of look at energy, Great British Energy, well, OK, well, that's great. How does that help Mrs. Miggins with her gas bill come the winter? How is it going to make a difference?
Yes, it's a lot of it is about means rather than ends. Voters want to know, what are you going to do for me or my local community or the country? But what are you actually going to do? What are you going to achieve rather than this is what we're going to do or announce, but it doesn't actually give the end game of, like, as you say, what will it do to my energy bill? OK, well, what will that mean in terms of my local streets? How long will I have to wait if I get referred for cancer treatment?
Well, exactly. Is it going to fix the potholes on the streets? And it's quite interesting. The only thing with some detail is the last one. 6,500 teachers. Now, that's quite a specific number. Have we decided that that's all we need? Do we not need more than that? Do we need fewer than that? It's also putting somewhere that you can point the finger and say, well, you failed to do that. Yeah. You've only got...
Well, but that's the key thing, isn't it? Because one of the reasons why Tony Blair, with his famous pledge card in '97, which had far more specifics, I mean, when you talk about teachers and class size things, like this was the first one. It was, remember, education, cut class sizes to 30 or under for 5, 6 and 7-year-olds, and they were funding it with the Assisted Places Scheme money. I mean, that was very, very specific. There were pledges on cutting VAT on heating to just 5% and things like that. Now, these are very specific pledges, and that was all about sort of proving that Labour could be trusted and they were going to be, you know, steady as she goes, but very specific pledges. We know with the Labour leadership right now and the advisors, they are, you know, they're way ahead in the polls, sometimes, you know, 20 points plus ahead of the polls of Tory party. But there is a great fear among the Labour leadership that actually there's not much love for Keir Starmer and what the Labour is offering. And it's just sort of they're angry with the Tories, that if the Tories can deal with channel migrants, if they can cut the waiting list, if the economy starts bouncing back properly, that actually that could really dent their support. And they're terrified of putting a foot wrong and sort of saying anything that could scare the horses. And that's going to be an issue, isn't it?
Yes, it is. People want specifics. And I think actually the general public just don't trust politicians at all.
I wonder why.
Of any party. So all they're going to say is, oh, it's another bunch coming along promising something that isn't going to happen because they're not going to make the effort in order to do so. Very interesting, and goes back to what you said earlier. Housing hasn't appeared. Now, Labour are supposedly putting forward plans for more houses to be built, that everybody will have some kind of affordable rent, whether that be rent control or anything along those lines. But they don't put it in their pledges, promises, wish list, whatever we call it these days. And I think that is a great mistake, because that would really set them apart from the Conservative Party, who have also forgotten about housing.
Yeah, which I found it absolutely extraordinary. I've had someone suggest to me before that actually there should be, you know, legal requirements for parties to fulfil manifesto pledges. Now, sometimes things will change. A lot of people say, well, you know, Boris Johnson didn't do X or Y. Well, you know, I don't think most people predicted there was going to be a pandemic. And yes, well, I don't agree with lockdowns, but there were going to have to be some policies. You know, other things were going to have to change and be prioritised when you had a global pandemic. But you know, Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May, you know, enshrined one of her last major acts in Prime Minister in her disastrous tenure in number 10, enshrined net zero as a legal requirement. We've had that sort of 0.7% of GDP having to go on foreign aid as a legal requirement that was instigated by David Cameron. Governments put those things in. Should we have a legal requirement on manifestos where, if you put it in your manifesto and you say you're going to do it, you have to do it?
But what if that action is then detrimental to the country? How do you then reverse that? What are the sanctions put upon a party for not obeying it? And it could be something that you and I fundamentally disagree with that goes forward and messes up, or it could be something that we believe in that isn't there. So I think it's a little bit...
That wouldn't work. In real life, that wouldn't work. Events, dear boy, events would take over. I suppose the sanction is, we'll say, well, you didn't do what you said you were going to do, so we're not going to vote for you next time.
But, I mean, we already have that, don't we? We look at the promises that are being made, pledges, promises, wishes, whatever, and we judge a party upon that as voters. That's how we go about it. That is what our democracy is. Now, it isn't perfect, but I think enshrining it in law just makes it far more dangerous.
Can I ask, what is the difference between a pledge and a promise from a politician, in your experience, having worked within government?
Semantics. Pure semantics. I think if something is a pledge, it puts it up the seriousness level. It means that you are going to do something.
I really mean this promise.
Yeah, and if sometime in the future.
And if you put it on a card, does that mean, is that sort of like, when sort of like, you sort of a pinky promise or, a bells on top, is that like a really, really serious, a really serious promise?
Yeah, put it on a credit card. You can put it in your wallet and produce it at any time. I mean, I think that's like my child's promise to tidy his room at every occasion. It's all very nice. Isn't going to happen.
I'll come round and sort that out for you, don't worry. But I've got vivid memories. I was working in the House of Commons in the late 90s as a political journalist, and I remember, you got John Prescott was walking around with his pledge card, and he'd have it in his pocket, and he'd keep it in his pocket while Labour were in power, saying, are we achieving these pledges? It was a gimmick, but it was a gimmick that appeared to work, an awful lot, a lot of focus on it. But of course, actually, there's no evidence that it changed the polls at all. It just said, I suppose, to a certain extent, what these pledge cards are about are setting out priorities and also trying to keep your candidates, your local councillors and your advisors on the same page with the same message. Because when people like me and you have heard the message 50 million times. That's why I won't take speeches live from these politicians, because, oh my God, I can't hear this stuff again. And I know people who cover like American campaigns for president. They go, it's so mind-numbingly boring most of the time, because it's just literally the same speech day after day, sometimes 4 or 5 times in the same day. But for most voters, they don't actually pay attention until about 2 weeks beforehand, and you need to be ramming these messages again and again before they hear about them.
That's right. You have to keep it simple. Parties produce the most enormous manifesto documents, which most people, including MPs, don't read.
Including Boris Johnson at the last election, apparently.
Well, precisely. I have read them. It's a very boring part of my job. And you sort of look at it, you think people aren't going to pay any attention. They're very dull. They're very dry. So having it simple and to hand does keep your councillors in line, does keep your members of parliament candidates in line. And hopefully the public will remember at least one of the lines on that card.
OK, and if you could have a pledge card yourself, anything that would really win your vote, I mean, Philip Ingram, he wants his own personal private space station. Oh, and a large yacht. Anything that would, if for want of a better phrase, float your boat?
Yes, I would like a distinct ban on people getting to the top of an escalator and grinding to a halt.
Oh,
yes. Definitely.
Again, we come back to my idea of snipers on trains and buses, about people playing their music loud on iPods, but I'll add it snipers for that as well.
Yep.
I'm just saying, I'm saying it's a policy that might take off one day. Claire Pearsall, lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much. The roar of agreement there from you and me, Philip.
Oh, definitely.
Do you know what I do? I just go straight
through them.
One of my real rules in life these days, trying to get fit and healthy in my old age, is I always walk up escalators. If it's I have to walk up it, and I'm carrying my bags. I'm a bit of a hot desker, so I have heavy bags on both sides, and I just march up the escalator. And it's woe betide, and is where I work at London Bridge. Very, very steep and very long escalators. And I march up, way beside anyone in front of me walking slowly. I just like, oh, sorry,
When I see the crowd at the end, I sort of get down into your rugby tackle mode as it comes in. It's amazing how quickly people move when they see that happening.
Yeah. I mean, he's a big lad. I mean, Claire's, as always, while we are on the show so often, she's very right about an awful lot of this.
Yes.
This is about, like focusing attention, isn't it? And but again, the lack of detail can put people off. But it's big picture, isn't it? A lot of it it's big picture?
It is big picture, but the lack of substance. And I keep saying it. Politics by soundbite. It just doesn't work. But she's given us a real tip, or anyone that's listening from who's producing the manifestos, produce a manifesto that's readable and entertaining, and people might listen to it. Yeah,
I can guarantee to you most political journalists working in the House of Commons don't read the manifesto in full. I'll tell you that right now.
And as you say, politicians, which is why we need a credit card with the statements on this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, you need to know what's on offer, don't you? Again, often a lot of the policies aren't what we're told about in advance. I mean, again, like if you think about, say, net zero 2019, it was in the manifesto. It was one of big section to it, but I mean no one really noticed. We're all focusing on Brexit, and not getting Corbyn elected. There's an awful lot of stuff in the small print that we then get tied to. People go, I didn't vote for that. Well, I hate to tell you, you did. Right, Philip, thank you very much indeed for that.